Puneet, one of the biggest initiatives that's associated with you and your time at Flipkart is the app-only strategy. The move to take Flipkart and Myntra to a mobile-first kind of world. Was that really your brainchild?
I think, first of all, app-only strategy isn't really a question of channel, it's a question of mindset. The idea that we actually think as a company and as an ecosystem holistically mobile first is very important. Second, in no company is something only one person's brainchild. Everything is a leadership's collective decision. We basically decide we want to do something and we go forth and do it. It is something I have consistently believed in, the idea of being mobile. I have always said that whatever we do, we should think from the perspective of that guy in Raipur who may be using a tier 2 Android phone where the memory is low, the network is flaky, and try to figure out what experience they'll get. But having other channels open for other people is absolutely fine. And so, to me, it's an important way to think. It's not necessarily a channel strategy.
Right. Moving on from Flipkart to the Indian startup ecosystem per se. We've been hearing a lot of noise around Silicon Valley, expats like yourself coming and joining, leading Indian unicorns as such. A lot of experts did foresee that there's going to be a cultural mismatch. There are different ways of doing business in the Valley and in India. What are your learnings? Is the cultural aspect very stark, and is it difficult to merge both your Western learnings and the ground realities here in India?
I think that the question goes both ways. What is the ecosystem's learning about trying to actually get Valley leadership to come here and work, and what is the leadership's or the team's learning on what they can do better? It is a different setup. I will say that the idea of entrepreneurship in India was built from a point where there was basically no infrastructure. And so there was a lot of, innovation that came around that. And then later on, now the world's best product and tech companies are competing. So the competition earlier was lack of infrastructure. The competition now is, the world's best and greatest product and tech companies. I think the learning from the ecosystem perspective is, if you're actually going to bring people from the Valley, then how will you absorb them? What kind of setup should you provide them? What kind of autonomy would they have? How would they actually even think about the kind of things they want to do? And the learning from perhaps from the perspective of somebody like me or others who are coming in my shoes is, do you really understand India? Did you walk on the streets and see what people actually wanted? Do you think that everything that you learned in US actually is directly applicable to India? The answer to almost all of those questions is no, it's not, that easy. I may be born in India, but I've never really worked here. It took some time to figure out how the entrepreneurs here operated. It took some time to figure out the differences between the investors here and the investors in the Valley. There were things that you take for granted that actually are not, to be taken for granted in India.
So do you think in hindsight some more homework is required for an expat moving from, the US to India?
No, there's no homework in the world that can prepare you for this. Okay. The only way this works is patience. And I think that's something that the Indian ecosystem lacks. The truth is, if you get people from outside, they probably will have some things they'll have to learn over time to actually do things. They will also bring certain things that are actually mostly much more long-term in thinking. The impact actually shows up later. The culture actually evolves over, multiple years. What the Indian ecosystem needs probably is a lot more patience, and what these people who come from outside need is a lot more understanding that they have a lot of learning to do.
So are Indian entrepreneurs and investors myopic in your view? Do they focus much more on, say short-term gains and benefits? Because there's this entire focus on GMV and traction, which seems to be linked to your next round of funding. So is that a key learning for you?
I think that would be very unfair and a broad generalization to make that the Indian investors and entrepreneurs are myopic in nature. Here's the simple way to look at this story. There's a country. It's amazing. There's a lot of riches to be got here. The market is big. And people started these companies when there was no infrastructure. They fought. They're role models in terms of entrepreneurship. They grew. As they were growing, there was a lot of people from around the world who saw the potential. and they pumped in unbelievable amounts of money, maybe much more than that was needed. As it was being pumped in, they also attached to that certain goals that actually might have led to growth but may not have led to sustainability. To me, that's the story. Does that make the entrepreneurs myopic? No way. I mean, look at some of the people who have, look at the Bansals, look at Kunal Behel, look at all the other guys, Vijay and others who started companies. They're not myopic. They're forward-facing people who have thought about India that was very different from the India they grew up in. It takes a lot of guts to do that. But there were choices that might have been made in the ecosystem that may have bound the entrepreneurs and these companies to goals that are unrealistic.
What about churn? Look at the top 5 unicorns. They regularly keep losing top talent. CXO level executives, and also in the mid to lower rung. Why is that happening in your view?
I think there's a lot of inward introspection that's required to be done to actually think about that. I'll go back to the point I made earlier. Why do we hire all these people? Why was I brought in, for example, right? Because it perhaps was rightfully thought that there is a whole new way of doing things. There will be product, the tech is at core, etc. But that's not enough. Thought is not enough, and in Flipkart, perhaps I actually got a very good setup. I had the support of all the leaders. We were actually working together. We have built a stellar team. We have done some fundamental changes in the way the culture of the company was set up, that they're actually working faster and more agile now than they were before. What you do now takes a year or two to actually show up in companies, and so we will see how these things pan out. But in many of the other companies, perhaps that may not be true. I don't know the answer to that. I'm not there. I think what happens is that when you actually bring people in, you need to couple that with patience and understanding of the ecosystem they come from, long-term thinking, and figure out how you can do that in the current ecosystem you're working. That's a very hard nut to crack. So I wouldn't diss, the Indian ecosystem for not figuring it out. I think the blame lies both places. We're all trying to figure out how to make these things work.
If I can just rephrase my question and put you in the hot seat, why is Flipkart losing so many people?
Flipkart, it's hard for me to answer that question, to be very honest. I think Flipkart has been around for a much longer time. It's basically the biggest company in the internet services ecosystem today. They have seen a lot of good things and they've seen a lot of bad things. Whenever a downturn comes or some winter comes, a lot of senior executives think that it might be a good time to actually go and figure out their own thing. When things are very, very hot and things are working very well, a lot of junior executives think that they should go and they should actually join the next big startup. Companies leak people all the time. Large companies do that all the time. If you're in Bay Area, you will see the Uber, at regular interval keeps losing people also. That's okay, as long as you can actually replace them with good talent and as long as you have a relatively clear strategy.
Time for a short break, but don't go anywhere. We are still talking to Puneet Soni. Please come back.